Today, we are going to unpack one of the most dramatic, emotional, and frankly shocking character transformations in modern storytelling. We're looking at the evolution of Kratos from the God of War franchise. For years, this was a character defined purely by rage, bloodlust, and destruction. But recently, we've seen a completely different side of him. How exactly does a literal God-slayer become a restrained, protective father attempting to outrun his own nature? Well, let's dive into this explainer and find out. I want to anchor our entire explainer right off the bat around this incredibly powerful quote from Kratos. "We will be the gods we choose to be, not those who have been." This single line completely redefines the rules of the mythological universe we're exploring here. It basically establishes our core theme, breaking the generational cycle of violence. It's the thesis statement for Kratos' entire modern journey. But to truly understand why this choice is so incredibly heavy, we have to look at what he's trying so desperately to leave behind. Section 1, the God of Vengeance. Because before Kratos could even talk about choosing to be a better god, he was deeply, fundamentally entrenched in the worst of what godhood had to offer. Ares, Athena, Persephone, Poseidon, Hades, Helios, Hermes, Hephaestus, Hera, and finally, right down to his own father, Zeus. Just look at the sheer scale of this list. This is Kratos' resume from his time in ancient Greece. He didn't just disagree with the Greek pantheon, he absolutely decimated it. From decapitating Helios to beating Zeus to death with his bare hands, Kratos was a literal killing machine. He was fueled entirely by vengeance after being tricked by Ares into murdering his own mortal family. This staggeringly long, bloody list of murdered deities, that is the heavy baggage Kratos carries. It's the terrifying baseline of his character. Moving to Section 2. A father in hiding. Decades later, we find Kratos in the Norse realms, and he is fundamentally changed. The contrast is just staggering. On one side, we have the old Kratos, characterized by Spartan rage, screaming, violent, literally tearing gods apart out of pure vengeance. But then we see his new reality, Nordic restraint. When we first meet him in the 2018 narrative, he's silent, he's disciplined, and he's doing something incredibly human and vulnerable. He's chopping wood for his recently deceased wife's Faye's funeral pyre. He is desperate to live as a mortal. He hides his past, and he hides his godhood from his new son, Atreus. He wants absolutely nothing to do with the divine because he knows exactly what being a god turns you into. Which brings us to a really crucial concept, the cycle of patricide. This is a tragic, generational curse within these mythologies where children are fated to kill their parents out of anger, ego, and vengeance. Kratos killed his father Zeus. Zeus overthrew his father Kronos. So, you see, Kratos' absolute ultimate fear is that Atreus will inherit this violent godhood. It's actually a deeply relatable human fear, right? The terror of passing on our own toxic traits and generational trauma to our kids. He's terrified that if Atreus learns he's a god, his ego will inflate. He'll become quick to temper, and he'll inevitably repeat Kratos' own horrific sins. Section 3, Actions over Words. So how on earth does a storyteller convey this massive internal psychological struggle? Well, they've built it right into the very mechanics of the experience. The narrative relies entirely on a single-shot camera. Think about that. From the opening frame to the end credits, the camera literally never cuts away. There are zero loading screens hiding transitions. The camera just sits closely, right over Kratos' shoulder. And why does this matter? Because it forces an unbroken, incredibly intimate connection to their emotional journey. As a viewer, you simply cannot look away. You are tethered to this father and son, which mirrors the inescapable, heavy reality of Kratos' fatherhood. Every tense silence, every subtle movement, it's all magnified. For example, consider this very specific, quiet moment. Atreus successfully hunts a deer. Kratos reaches out to pat his son's shoulder to congratulate him, which is a totally normal parental reaction, right? But then, he hesitates. He silently pulls his hand back. He just doesn't know how to be a normal father. He doesn't say a word, but his restrained body language screams volumes about his helplessness. He desperately wants to show affection, but he's terrified of validating the violence of the hunt. He's terrified of fostering the monster he knows resides in their bloodline. Actions, or in this case the total lack of action, speak far louder than words. Section 4. The cycle of patricide. But Kratos and Atreus aren't the only ones dealing with the burdens of family. The Norse gods are introduced specifically as narrative foils. Notice how these broken family relationships map out as dark mirrors to our protagonists. Consider Freya and Balder. Freya absolutely loves her son, but she smothers him with desperate protection, and that leads to deep resentment and attempted matricide. Then look at Thor and his son Modi. Their relationship is straight up abusive, built purely on the pride and ego of godhood. When Modi shows cowardice, Thor literally beats his own son within an inch of his life. These are the dark, violent paths Kratos and Atreus could so easily go down. These Norse families are cautionary tales of unchecked ego and toxic parenting. Let's look closer at Baldur. To cheat a prophecy for telling Baldur's death, Freya blessed him with invincibility. But this had a horrific side effect. He was deprived of all physical sensation. He couldn't feel pain, sure, but he also couldn't feel a warm breeze, or the taste of food, or the touch of another person. Driven absolutely mad by a century of physical and emotional numbness, Baldur becomes consumed by one single desire: to punish and murder his mother for taking away his ability to feel. It's the ultimate tragedy of a parent's inability to just let their child make their own choices. This all comes to a head in a pivotal climax. Baldur is about to strangle Freya to death, and Freya is completely willing to let her son murder her if it will somehow bring him peace. But Kratos steps in. He snaps Baldur's neck to save Freya's life, and he delivers this incredibly powerful line: "This cycle ends here. We must be better than this." Kratos is making a definitive, active choice here. He is looking at the cycle of children killing their parents, and he is forcing it to stop. He refuses to let Atreus witness another generation of gods consumed by vengeance. Section 5, Ragnarok and Betrayal. But, as you can guess, ending that cycle has immense, cataclysmic consequences, which brings us to the events of the sequel. Kratos killing Baldur triggered Fimbulwinter. This is a harsh 3-year winter that prophesies Ragnarok, the literal apocalyptic end of the Norse world. So the stakes couldn't possibly be higher. The death of one god to save a mother's life has quite literally brought the end of the world to Kratos and Atreus' doorstep. They can no longer hide in the woods. They are forced out into the open to seek allies to survive the coming war against Odin and Asgard. And in their desperate search for allies, they find Tyr, the Norse god of war, hoping he'll lead them. But in one of the most devastating twists in modern storytelling, we learn the horrific truth. Tyr was Odin in a magical disguise all along. Odin infiltrated their group, sat at their table, and manipulated them. And when he's finally discovered, he brutally murders the beloved dwarven blacksmith, Brock, right in the living room of his brother Sindri's house. It is a shocking betrayal that sets the final apocalyptic climax into motion. This builds into a rapid, explosive finale. First, Kratos battles Thor. Kratos wins, but instead of finishing him off like the old god of vengeance would have, he chooses mercy. He begs Thor to be better for the sake of their children. And amazingly, Thor actually listens. But almost immediately, Odin appears and murders his own son for his disobedience. The cycle of terrible parents rears its ugly head again. Ultimately, Kratos, Atreus, and Freya unite and defeat Odin. But crucially, Kratos and Atreus step back. They don't deal the final blow. It is a heartbroken, grieving Sindri who steps forward and shatters the orb holding Odin's soul, permanently ending the Allfather. Kratos, truly, finally practices the restraint he has been preaching. Section 6, A Destroyer No More. So, where does this leave our characters when the dust of Ragnarok finally settles? The aftermath is incredibly bittersweet. Asgard is totally annihilated by the fire giant Surt. Atreus, now a young man who has learned the lessons of compassion from his father, departs alone on a solo journey to find the lost giants. Kratos watches him go, so proud of the man he's become. Freya and Kratos, who were once mortal enemies, now vow to rebuild the surviving realms together. But it's not a perfect happy ending. Sindri, having lost his brother Brock, remains totally isolated, pushing away his friends and consumed by his grief. The cycle of violence ended, yes, but those deep emotional scars, they absolutely remain. And this brilliantly illustrates the completion of Kratos' arc. Just contrast these two murals. We started with prophecies of a bloody past and endless death, but at the very end of Ragnarok, Kratos discovers a hidden mural in Jotunheim. It depicts Kratos painted in shimmering gold. He's not fighting. He's being worshipped and revered as a peaceful, beloved leader. By choosing to spare his enemies, by choosing to break the cycle of patricide, Kratos successfully defied his own prophecy. He literally changed his fundamental nature. Which leaves us with this incredibly provocative final thought. Kratos spent his entire existence defined by the title God of War. He was a monster, a killer, and a destroyer. But he fought his own nature. He guided his son away from darkness, and he earned a completely new path. So, if the God of War is a destroyer no more, what kind of god will he become next? It really makes you rethink everything about this violent icon. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope it leaves you reflecting on the very human, immense power of choosing to break our own cycles and be better.